it's almost like the people used to complain about the commute to work, but that was almost the time like you cross over from like, okay, here's my boundary. I do what I need to do to get to work, and then I focus. And then when I leave, I like clear my mind, and I get home, and then I'm at home. And now you're working and you're at home the whole time, it seems like. It's almost like the thing people complain about, the commute, is actually one of the best things. Whether it's 10 minutes or maybe 2 hours is not good. For sure. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because it provided a transition window.
A window, not like I'm in my bedroom and now I'm at the chair in my bedroom in front of a computer.
Right. And like we'd already seen a blurring that over the last decade because of connectivity and technology.
Yeah.
You know, the expectation that you're always going to be on 7 days a week, and if like your device is on, then you should be responding.
Yes.
But when you actually then physically conflate your work environment with your home environment, and you remove even that opportunity to like physically transition from one place to another, the problem gets exacerbated in a really big way. So like all these things, we were already sort of like spiraling down into not a good place. But this has sort of like brought everything to the surface. But at the same time, it's sort of like you look at all the stats, and there is no such thing as disruption without possibility. Doesn't exist.
What does that
It's
mean?
not a natural phenomenon. Like disruption and possibility are two sides of the exact same coin. So if there's a massive disruption, right, you may be reeling because you have personally been disrupted. An organization, an industry may be reeling because all the assumptions that they built everything on have been shattered. But that moment, that level of upheaval, uncertainty, and stakes cannot exist without equal and sometimes opposite possibility being birthed simultaneously. So the question becomes, when we're talking about like an individual at work, is, yeah, like nobody saw, well, you can't say nobody saw the last couple of years coming, but what has happened has been profoundly disruptive in a way that like we've never imagined was possible. And at the same time, like we're moving through a lot of pain, and a lot of people had to figure out in the blink of an eye, okay, so how do I get myself as okay as I can in the context of work? You know, there's a lot of other domains that they've had to do that in, health and relationships, but in the context of work specifically, and they've kind of, a lot of folks have figured it out. But what's happened in the middle of all of this is, if there's this level of disruption, then you start asking the question, where is the possibility? Because it has to exist. It has to exist.
What's the possibility right now?
Right. So I'll use me as an example, right? We've been in the podcast world for a long time together, right? For the entirety of our show, we you know, part of the big differentiation was like Good Life Project will always be produced in the studio in person, like what you're doing, right? We want to raise the bar from the earliest day for production value. We said no to a lot of people I thought would be amazing to speak with because they weren't in New York, they weren't going to be in the studio, and I wouldn't do anything remote.
You were doing Skype or
right,
whatever.
I could not conceive.
You were doing all video and everything.
Right, right. I could not conceive of being able to have the quality of conversations, the safety, intimacy, and trust, you know, in a virtual space. I was just like, I can't do it, and if I have to do that, like, I'll do something else. So for 6 years, we produced conversations in person in the studio in New York. And then I wake up one day and I'm like, oh, that's over.
Can't do that anymore,
Right, you know, and in New York, we were the very early thing. So New York was devastated and completely shut down. I still remember the last live interview that we actually produced was Macy Gray, who came off the stage from the Beacon Theater, which was 3 blocks from the studio, and like came in after performing, and like that was it. Like she left the studio and we shut down.
Wow.
Right? So immediately I'm reeling because I'm like, are we done? You know, because this, like, a central part of what I'm about and everything we produce and what we're known for is these in-person intimate things in the studio. And I'm like, but we can't do that. Like, it's just not an option anymore.
Yes.
So then my brain goes into the next mode. Okay, so massive disruption, didn't want it to happen, still don't want it to happen. But I know also that you cannot have this level of disruption without a similar level of possibility. So where's the possibility? If I'm feeling like I'm the one that's being crushed right now, where's the possibility? Right. And I said, all right, so let's start to test all the assumptions, right? Katie Byron's the work. What is true? Where's the evidence for? Where's the evidence against? And once you start to realize a lot of my assumptions were really wrong, And now how can we actually completely redo our production process so that we can recreate the trust and safety and intimacy in the virtual space? How do we experiment with different platforms? How do we change the way that I go about creating things? And then we started to realize, okay, so we're up and running again, but doing everything virtually. And then I'm realizing, okay, so I always believed you could never create safety and intimacy in a virtual space. But what I'm seeing is that everybody is in their home right now. So we don't have the cocoon effect that I love, like, you know, where we're like in this, where we're casting a spell in the same space together.
Right, yeah.
But what we do have is the safety and trust of somebody being in their own home.
And feeling comfortable in their own
Right,
space.
which is different.
Not in their office and not in,
Right, because everybody's home at that point. So it's different, but at the same time, it made everything okay. And I realized we're having still like tremendous conversations. Would I love to get back into the studio soon? And do I hope, like we'll do more of this as we, of course.
Yeah.
Then I widen the lens out. I'm like, okay, so if my assumption has been we always have to be in New York because that's where everybody who I'm going to want to talk to, similar reason to why you're in LA, like everyone's going to be in one of these two cities at some point, right? Well, if we're actually producing remotely and our team is distributed around the world, from the post-production side, on a personal level, what kind of freedom does that give us? Well, we've thought about living somewhere else.
Right. Not staying in New York.
So all of a sudden, we find ourselves in September of last year, after growing up outside New York, living in New York City for 30 years, pulling up our roots. And literally, like as I sit here with you right now, if you ask me where is home, I can tell you legally I'm a resident of Colorado. We've been living in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah.
Like we're pulled out entirely of New York, but we're also sort of like experimenting with different locations. And I'm traveling around sometimes with my wife, who's also my business partner. So we're in life and work together. Sometimes with our daughter, like who's in and out of college, and so there's this kind of like magical possibility where when you start to actively look for it, that is all around you. But when you're so fiercely disrupted without seeing it coming, and there's a lot of pain that goes along with it, it sometimes takes a huge amount of energy to pull out of the feeling of trauma. And sometimes support and help, mental health, like, support from your community, everybody, to get to a place where you can actually start to ask the question, what is true, what is not true, and where is the possibility? That was a really long kind of range thing.
That's all good. So if we go back to the question, what should I be doing with my life right now?
Yeah.
How do we start to answer that and figure it out?
So, and this has been the focus of so much of my work, even in before times, what is really, how do we find and do work that nourishes us, that makes us come alive? And when I say come alive, I'm talking about those things that I already talked about. Like for me, it's like 5 things. It's meaningful, it's excitement, enthusiasm, it's expressed potential, it's flow. You become absorbed in the activity and lose the sense of time and sense of actually you being apart from the activity.
Yeah.
And it's a broader sense of purpose in life. So how do we find and do work that gives us that feeling? Like all 5 of those things weaving in and out of the way that we experience work. And for me, I've been fascinated with this question for so long. And a couple of years ago, I came to believe something I never would have thought that I would believe. And that is this, that we all have a unique impulse for effort that gives us that feeling of coming alive. Effort, you can just use the work instead. Like we're all wired in a certain way where if we invest ourselves, if we do a certain type of thing, then we get a lot closer to that feeling.
Yeah.
Once I started to feel this in me, and I was like, oh, I notice when I do this type of thing, I feel this type of way. I'm not talking about a job or a title or a company or a role or an industry. I'm talking really, really, really granular. I'm talking about like DNA level. So when I invest myself in a particular way, I feel alive. And then I started wondering, is this just me or is this everybody? And then are there a mappable set of imprints? Because if there are, and we could identify them and then somehow create ideas and tools that would let people understand what that is for you relatively easily.
Right.
A whole lot of angst would go away. And fundamentally, if, like I want to make things that move, the needle in people's lives, that's what I want to do. And that has literally been my devotion for years now, is sort of like identifying those and then helping people figure out like, what is that thing? So.
And I took this, you have this book called Spark, Discover Your Unique Imprint for Work That Makes You Come Alive. And there's kind of a quiz that you can take online. And I took the quiz, and it tells you your spark type.
Yeah.
How many spark type? 9?
So there are 10.
10
and I'll break it down for you, right? So, once I identified these imprints, I also realized, okay, so we found these 10 impulses, these 10 imprints for work. It also became really clear that each one of these kind of comes with its own behaviors, tendencies, and preferences that are really common. They're fairly universal for each one of them. And like it can be expressed in a really healthy way and also a really neurotic way. Yeah. And it was amazing to see like a larger archetype form around these. So I call them sparketypes just because it's fun. It's the archetype that sparks you. But this was still my idea, and I needed larger scale validation. So we built an assessment over a period of a year. We've now had about 500,000 people complete the assessment, 25 million data points, and gotten some really powerful validation from what started as an observation years ago. So for me, and the spark types, you basically break down to a profile, and there are 3 things that are part of that profile. So we can talk about like yours if you want, right? So, and first I'll tell you what the 3 elements are, then let's talk about what yours is, because I think it's really fascinating. So there's what I call the primary sparketype. Think of that as your strongest impulse for work that makes you come alive.
This is about work, or this is about life in general? It's more about work.
Okay, it's a really good question, because when I use the word work, I'm including all of the ways that you could actually devote yourself to effort.
Okay.
It could be the thing you get paid for.
Or it could be just
it could be being a parent.
Gotcha.
It could be being a volunteer. It could be like the art that you do on the side because you just can't not do it because of the feeling that it gives you. It's really nice when you can make it the thing that you wake up in the morning, spend 8 to 10 hours a day and get paid for it. That's awesome when you can do it.
Right.
You can't always do it, but a lot of times you can get way closer than you thought you could once you realize what that thing is. So the primary sparketype is your strongest impulse. Then we have what I call the shadow. And that's not like the dark side.
Right.
I call it the shadow because it lives in the shadow of the primary.
Okay.
And you can look at that one of 2 ways, right? You can either say,
it's like secondary
it's
almost.
like the runner-up, but what we've teased out a much more nuanced relationship over the years, and that is this. Most people do the work of their shadow in order to be able to do the work of their primary better, right? And we'll break that down in a second. And then there's a 3rd piece of the profile. And that's what I call your anti-sparketype.
So when you don't like, when you're not meant to do.
This is the work where like,
don't do this.
If you have to do it, it's emptying. You'll do everything you can do to not have to do this. When you do it, it takes the greatest amount of recovery. Now the thing is, for a lot of us in everyday life and in our jobs, we do have to do some of that work.
Of course.
It is what it is. But knowing that there's something deeper that makes you feel this way, it helps you frame it in a way where you understand what's really happening, where you don't picture yourself as lazy or just not devoted or incompetent. You actually understand there's something deeper going on.
Right.
And on a team basis, when you're working with other people, when everyone understands the impulses at both ends of the spectrum, it becomes an experience where you can really optimize. And also there's a lot of forgiveness and shame loss that becomes a part of this, right? Because you don't feel a sense of shame for not rising up because there's something else going on. Again, you may still have to do it, but at least like there's a more forgiving emotion wrapped around it. So those are the 3 parts of any given person's sparketype profile.
Okay.
So let's talk about you.
Yeah, so my primary is the Maven.
Right. So the fundamental energy of the Maven is all about knowledge acquisition, right? And that shows up in a couple of different ways. For some people, it shows up in this just like broad interest in everything. You wake up in the morning and you just want to dive into fascinations, topics of interest, people. Like you'll talk to everyone on the planet. You want to know their story. You don't want to use it for anything else. You're not solving a big problem. You just want to know it, and you have no idea.
Yeah.
Like everybody that you bump into, you just want to know. Yeah. Right? It also shows up in sometimes really, really specific ways. We talked about this recently, right? Because we go back a long time. And when I first met you, you were not
2008,
off your
2008, I think,
you were
right?
not off your sister's couch for that
Right,
long.
right, yeah.
Right? And you had kind of said, okay, so kind of done with being a pro athlete.
Yeah.
But that was sort of like the only thing that I knew. I devoted my entire life to this. So I'm going to look at this thing called LinkedIn at the time. And I'm going to learn everything on the planet about it. I'm going to know more about this platform than anyone. And I'm going to just dive into it. Right? And you became absolutely possessed.
Yes.
With being like the one person who knew more than anything about the platform. So it's like, I've seen this show up in your life broadly.
Yeah.
And I've also seen you go like, you find rabbit holes. Right? And sometimes there's some like really good like other thing you want to use the knowledge for, but sometimes it's just like so fascinating, just the process of learning, becoming encyclopedic about something in particular.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I love learning multiple skills and having just a tool belt of skills that I've acquired where maybe I obsessed for 3 months, maybe it was a year, maybe it was, I did that with public speaking, with salsa dancing, with, I'm in Spanish lessons now. It's like all these different things, podcasting, it's like whatever. It's just like obsessing for a period of time to learn.
And what's interesting is for a lot of Mavens from the outside looking in, people think that the core drive is the things that they're creating with the knowledge that they're accumulating. And that's nice. It's great that you've been able to build like a powerful career and affect a lot of people's lives and like a show that makes a really big difference. And at the same time, at the end of the day, for you, like this is almost like in part a funding engine for your relentless desire to just go deep and learn and learn and learn, and discover new things and like go deep into that sort of knowledge acquisition rabbit hole. So that's the primary for you. So that's not the whole thing.
Right. So there is this sense of like, okay, because you have all these questions are very interesting that are in the assessment.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think one of them was like, do you want to learn for learning's sake, or do you want to learn to create something to like better something? And it's like there's all these different types of questions.
Yeah.
So that's the primary, the Maven for me. The shadow is the maker.
Right.
What is the maker?
So the maker for me is my primary. That is my main impulse, and that's all about making ideas manifest.
It's like turning an idea into
a thing.
And I've always thought of myself as an alchemist, where it's like I love to turn ideas into a reality. Whether it's like I want to learn a skill and be able to apply it. I have an idea. I want to launch a book or a podcast. So what you've also said is like they might be complementary, like 1, 2,
and
kind of
they
like,
they could kind of be like fairly close impulses, and they often work. They kind of like tag team with each other because they serve each other in a really, really powerful way. Right. So for me, the maker showed up in my life. I was the kid when I was like 8 or 9 years old, where like I would have my parents drive me to the town dump. We'd throw bike parts into the back of the old Chevy Blazer, and then I'd go home and duct tape them together into Franken bikes.
Right.
And I've been making things from the time, literally I cannot remember a time in my life where I didn't open my eyes and be like, what can I create today? I'm obsessed.
That's cool.
I'm driven by the impulse to make stuff.
So you're the maker. That's your main thing,
And that's shown up as books, it's shown up as companies, it's shown up as experiences, events. But the fundamental energy is idea to something.
Right. Okay. So that's my secondary.
Right. So that's like the high end of like that. That's the strong impulsive for you.
Right. Right.
Now let's talk about your antispark.
The antispark type is the essentialist.
Right. Okay. So you and I share an antispark type.
We have the same type of.
Yeah. We have similar profiles. My top end is I'm a maker scientist, so maker primary and scientist shadow. So I make stuff. And then I figure out complex things, but it's almost always in service of being better at the creation process. Yeah. Like I don't just go down a rabbit hole because there's a really cool, complex thing that I just want to like solve this huge, big burning question. And an actual scientist archetype would be driven by that. I do it, I get to the point where I figured out what I need to figure out to go back to the creation process. So the anti-spark type, right? That's your weakest impulse, or the thing that empties you the most, takes the greatest amount of recovery. So the essentialist, the primary essentialist, the impulse is to create order from chaos. It's about systems, it's about process, it's about clarity, it's about a lot of granular, it's taking complex data sets, processes, steps, all these things that need to happen, like behind the scenes production for the show. Guaranteed. You've got spreadsheets, you've got platforms, you've got a ton of moving pieces.
I can't deal with it though.
We have like for our show, we have around 40 episodes in production at any given time.
Wow.
I can't, like I have, when I look at that, I just want to cry.
Right.
Like my impulse is run when I see that.
And some people see that like this is a beautiful piece of art.
Right. So our producer is an essentialist. And she looks at that and she's like, yeah, let me at it. Like, I want to build out these systems. I want to run them. I want to optimize them. I want to make them function better. I want to create order and clarity rather than chaos. And I want to create utility from it also. So, when you're not an essentialist, having to do the work of an essentialist is experienced generally as not fun in a really big way. Like when I think about that, in any company I've built in the past, that type of work, before I really even understood this about myself, it would always be the thing that if I had to do it, I would do it for as long as I had to do it, because that's what you do when you're starting a new business and you're bootstrapped. But as soon as I was sort of like well enough resourced to have the ability to hand it off or delegate it or contract it out, it would be the first thing. And also because there are people where that impulse is primary. They wake up in the morning and they're like, let me at it. So why not have that person aligned with that work?
Absolutely.
Because then they're going to show up wanting to do it. They're doing it because of the feeling it gives them and the fact that actually if it's a full-time job and you can support yourself, that's awesome. But they're probably also doing things on the side on a volunteer basis or a free basis that are really similar just because of the feeling that it gives them.
Yeah.
But for me and you, not that.
No, I'm going to run from that stuff.
Yeah.
It's almost like if taking this could really help you discover like what I should do with my life and what meaningful work I should be doing, or maybe this is why I'm feeling like I'm in a rut or avoiding things, or I feel like I'm resistant to doing certain work that I'm supposed to do because it's not what you're aligned to do. And it seems like it could be an assessment that you give to potential people that you want to bring on your team and say, is this person going to be a good fit for this role? It's
interesting because I've been asked a lot. We've started doing a fair amount of work with this body of work in organizations in the context of leadership and engagement and team dynamics. And I've been asked, like, is this a hiring tool? Like, should we use this to hire people? And the answer is actually no. Like, I don't think this or really any other of the mainstream assessments that are on the market for organizations right now are really well used that way. My take is it's a great tool to look at the people you have, who you love, who are a good culture fit, and figure out, okay, so how do we navigate what they're doing? How do we give them a set of tools and some insights that will help them really understand how to contribute to their role, to their work, to the organization, to their lives in a way which is going to be most nourishing for them. And then within the context of the organization, potentially say, okay, so like, how can we support that? Like, does it mean that you're doing this type of work? Are you job crafting or re-optimizing, reimagining what you're doing in a way that goes beyond the job description that you were first brought in to do, but maybe it's actually going to make you not just happier, but more fulfilled, a stronger sense of meaning, and allow you to access that sense of potential that you know is there. So, one person who I know I've spoken with who runs 2 different companies has described it to me as it's been a really powerful way to remove friction within teams, within individuals' experience of work and organizations. It's like the wheels are greased. Everything just works easier. There's less tension, there's less friction, because people are showing up doing more of what actually makes them come alive. Burnout has been on the rise on every survey, every bit of research that I've seen for the last 10 to 15 years. Right? So this is just kind of bringing it to the surface because it was the perfect storm of circumstance. It's been going on for a long time. And I think there's an underlying issue, and that is